Hi. What's up, balcony? See, we got TVs up there now, so you can see if you sit right here, you can't see the screen. So now there's TVs. Guys, modern problems require modern solutions, okay? In the book of Romans, here's a verse that Paul writes, and I think it deserves speculation, but here's what he says. The wrath of God is being revealed from heaven against the godlessness and wickedness of people who suppress the truth by their wickedness. Then he makes a really bold claim. Since what may be known about God is plain to mankind, because God has made it plain to mankind. For since the creation of the world, God's invisible qualities, namely his eternal power and his divine nature, have been clearly seen, being understood from what has been made, so that mankind is without excuse. So this is a bold claim. Paul says, if your common argument for God is if God were real, why doesn't he reveal himself to us? Why doesn't he prove himself to us? Why doesn't he give us evidence for it? I think what Paul would contend here is that if God were here in our midst right now and you were able to ask him it face to face, I don't think it would hold up to scrutiny of the question of why haven't you made yourself obvious? Why haven't you made yourself plausible? Why haven't you made yourself known? I think God's response would be from creation to nature, to leptons, to neutrinos, to subatomic particles, to the ocean, to the depths, to the mating rituals of the leopard slug. I have put my character and my reality all over nature. There are things that bear no explanation within a causal expectation of methodological naturalism. There are things that must appeal to something bigger. This is really the root of the God hypothesis. When we have these conversations, as we're gonna dive into today, we're really asking the question, is it reasonable for someone in 2024 to believe everything that the Bible talks about? That there's a God, first and foremost, that the God has made himself known through the scriptures, that this is a rational, cogent worldview. And we're talking about this idea of having sufficient reason to believe this and evidence. And one thing I think we mess up sometimes is when we say the word evidence, people might say to me time and time again, if I'm doing a conference or I'm doing a talk on apologetics somewhere, they might say, well, if you gave me proof of God's existence, then I would believe. And really, when you talk about something like the existence of God, the word proof doesn't make a lot of sense, okay? Because proof, especially through a scientific community, is something that can be proven in a lab. It's subject to observable, measurable, and repeatable stimuli. We can prove, as much as you want to say so, that water boils at 212 degrees Fahrenheit. We can prove that objects in vacuums fall at a rate of 9.8 meters per second. Those are things that we can observe, measure, and repeat over and over and over again. There are other things that you don't do what we call empirical evidence for. So this is empirical evidence, but it's more this idea of forensic evidence. Forensic evidence, think of like a crime scene. When you come on a crime scene and you see it, your objective as a detective is not to prove exactly what happened, but it's to present the best possible explanation for all the criteria that you see. And that the explanation that you give has to fit all of the different questions that are asked at the crime scene. You come to the best reasonable conclusion, then a jury decides whether or not what you're saying is the most plausible thing that possibly could have happened, okay? For instance, if I asked you to prove to me that Abraham Lincoln delivered the Emancipation Proclamation, where would you start? You have to start somewhere. What if I told you I don't really think Abraham Lincoln delivered the Emancipation Proclamation? Prove it. You would start by going to eyewitnesses, right? You would not put me in a laboratory and say, this is Abraham Lincoln-ness. This is Lincolnium 245. You would start by going, well, first of all, the Emancipation Proclamation has been widely known to be delivered by Abraham Lincoln. So if you think he didn't, what would be your best reason for it? Well, I haven't seen a picture of Abraham Lincoln. There's pictures of Abraham Lincoln. Well, just look at it. Prove to me that's Abraham Lincoln. Is that what Abraham Lincoln looked like? Did you see him? Some of y'all are old. Are you that old? That you're like, that's him. We call him Abe. We're on first name basis. That's Abe. I know Abe. You can't. We build a case for the best reason that Abraham Lincoln did that through forensic evidence. Eyewitnesses said this. This is what history documents. There is no contention in this through all of history. This is the most rational explanation for all of the stimuli concerning the event. All the questions are answered simply by Abraham Lincoln is the one who delivered the Emancipation Proclamation. That's the best explanation for all the criteria that we find. So when it comes to things like historical events or a God hypothesis, what we're really asking is not for you to prove it to me like empirical evidence in a lab, but given all of the different criteria and questions, what's the best explanation that satisfies the broadest range of questions? So when we do that, we jump into this notion, and this is a hypothesis that needs to be tested. Theism is the best explanation for the world we see and experience. Theism is the best explanation for the world that we see and experience. This is the hypothesis, okay? This is not strictly supported by some experiential endeavor of the soul. We're not contending that God exists because I feel like he exists, or God exists because he fixed my marriage, or God. There is a robust, cogent, powerful, reasonable, explanatory worldview behind believing in God. Right? The majority of scientists are theists. The majority of all of mankind believe the same thing. But all that is an argument from populists or an argument from authority. That means nothing. We have to ground it in the truth of the observable things that we do see. So this conclusion is supported by sound logic, philosophical truths, human experience, which is absolutely a part of truth, right? Scientific discoveries, and abductive reasoning. Abductive reasoning is an inference to the best conclusion. Given everything we see, what is inferred to be the best possible explanation for all the things that we see, okay? So I'll do a little bit of a observation of this word explanatory scope. Explanatory scope is the ability that an answer has to satisfy all of the questions involved in a particular issue or in a problem. I'll give you an example here, okay? Believe, if you will, there are these three guys named Denny, Lenny, and Kenny, okay? I'm naming them that because that's how I remember them. These aren't real people. This is all AI generated. I've been playing with AI this week. I feel like I don't have a soul anymore because I went into the deep crevices of the AI and now I'm back, okay? Anyway, these aren't real people. This is all AI generated, okay? Denny, Lenny, and Kenny, they're Egyptologists. They were hired a couple years back by a mogul named Robert Chamberlain III they discovered these catacombs, and on the catacombs was this language that no Egyptologist has ever been able to understand. These three guys, Denny, Lenny, and Kenny, actually figured out that the language on the walls was a new language that was previously unknown called Moot, okay? Moot, this is all fictitious. Moot is a new language that it took them 2 years to decipher. The problem with Moot, and probably why it doesn't exist as a language that we speak anymore, it is Moot, that's a pun, it won't happen again. The reason is about 30 perfectly designed characters equals like one letter. So if you want to write out a letter, like a note in Moot, it takes you like 18 pages to say like, hi, my name is Chris Hilken. So it's just not a very efficient language, but these guys took to studying and figuring out all these things. And at this point, because of Robert Chamberlain III's endeavor, only 3 people on planet Earth understand and can write Moot. They're the only ones who have had access to the catacombs where Moot has been understood. Well, after they figured this out, they were each given $3 million in order to start kind of this endeavor of explaining this to the world. And before they were able to do so, they realized that these 3 Egyptologists had taken so much money and it had taken so long to do what they needed to do that they were gonna find and hire different people and they were gonna just let the whole Moot endeavor die. It was too complex, it was too complicated. So after giving each of them a few $1 million, they said, now you're fired. Well, this made them very unhappy. They're very sad. They were angry at this. So, which isn't a big deal, except that their boss, Robert Chamberlain III, here he is in all, it's all AI, this isn't a real guy. It's kind of weird, huh? He is so rich. He actually has a cabin, and a phenomenal cabin on top of this mountain that exists in the Alps, and only 3 people have ever been to it besides Robert Chamberlain III, Denny, Lenny, and Kenny, as they were pitching the idea for the new grant that they wanted. But this cabin is only accessible by helicopter. And as part of their endeavors, Denny, Lenny, and Kenny all had to learn how to fly helicopters because they had to go visit him often to explain all their work and their research. So he lives on top of this mountain. There's no roads up there. You need to hire a helicopter. You need to have a helicopter to get up there, okay? The problem is, we just found out, this was 2 years ago, last week, he was killed. Robert Chamberlain III was killed in his cabin. His body was found somewhere that I didn't want to show in church, okay? It was bad, okay? And you walk on the scene. He hasn't been heard from in a while, so you do hire a pilot and you go up to the top and you're a detective and you see this scenario playing itself out. And you have a set of questions or a set of possible ideas, understandings. You have criteria that you need to satisfy. Here's some of it. On the ground, looks like a lot of writing, doesn't it? In moot, all this says is, you shouldn't have fired those guys. That's all it says. It's not a very efficient language, but it's written right here in the language of moot. You also have these paw prints from a dog. They check it. There's some hair on the ground over here, and it's from a German Shepherd, okay? It's on top of the mountain. This is the detective's helicopter, because that's the only way that you can actually access the cabin. It's snowing outside, so we're able to see this. There aren't footprints inside, and outside of the fact that this guy's dead and this is written on the ground, nothing else is disturbed. He's got money in his drawers. He's got other things. He's got jewelry. No one touched it. This is what you stumble upon. So your job as a detective is to make sense of all of this mumbo jumbo, okay? So here's some of the questions you have to answer. Who can speak the moot language? Help me out. Denny, Lenny, and Kenny. So at the start, you've got 3 possible suspects. Why is there German Shepherd hair? Good question. How did someone get up there to do this? Why would someone do this? Here we're looking for the idea of motive. Who could possibly have wanted to do this? Why does he seem to have been attacked by an animal? Why is everything else undisturbed? Why is the artistry so professional, right? Question to ask. Why is there no witness of a hired pilot? So you walk in there and you're the new detective and you go, easy. Robbery. It was a robbery. That explains why he was dead. He tried to stop him and he was killed. Case closed. What's the problem? Nothing's missing. That's a dumb thing. Not only that, you've got a lot more questions. Like, the robber learned moot? Only 3 people had access to the very catacombs that it was, which means at the end of the day, we're actually brought down to having 3 possible suspects. And you might think to yourself, you walk on the scene and you think, it was nature. You see, he left a window open, wolf, German Shepherd of German Shepherd descent, came in, killed him, and walked out. Case closed, end of story, we're done. Does that satisfy all the questions of the case? No, how come? We have language on the ground, and language implies intelligence and sentience and agency and purpose and value. And it's not just any language, right? If you saw the language on the ground was like the letter I, you might go, okay, an animal could have possibly accidentally done that, like dragging something through the, but this is moot, man. This is a crazy language no one else speaks. So it doesn't satisfy all the possible criteria to say robbery, nature, or an accident. None of that makes any sense. So you start to go through your list of suspects. You call up Denny, Lenny, and Kenny. Denny's the first one you call up, but his phone keeps ringing because 3 months ago, Denny died. He died in some Egyptian accident, okay? I didn't think about what killed him until this very moment. He's no longer with us, okay? So now we got 2 suspects, Lenny or Kenny. The problem is, Lenny was involved in a conspiracy in order to take down a rescue mission that was helping a whole bunch of animals be rescued, namely dogs, because he hates dogs. So, he's in prison. He's been in prison for months. No dogs allowed, he doesn't even like them, okay? So you might think to yourself, well, Denny's dead, I'm just probably Lenny. That is reasonable because it satisfies things like the moot language. The problem with it is he's in prison. Another problem with it is, what else? The guy hates dogs. So you need to come up with a solution of how, and this could be your postulation as a detective. Well, Lenny got out of prison without anyone noticing. He found overnight an idea that he really loved dogs. He then he brought a helicopter up. He committed all these things, then snuck back into prison, locked himself in, and pretended like nothing ever happened. Is that reasonable? No. Is it possible? Sure. But the question we're not asking is what is possible. We're asking what best explains everything. So then you call up the third character. His name is Kenny. And when you meet him, you find him, he looks like this. Oh, that's not it. You go, Kenny? He says, yes, in moot. And you go, what kind of dog is that? He's like, a German Shepherd. What's that? It's a paintbrush. Why is it red? I was painting red things. So you have this as a possible solution. It wouldn't make sense then. This is it's Occam's razor. Whatever best makes sense of everything without appealing to a much more complicated scenario is what we consider to be the best explanation for the event that took place. Anyone who says it was probably Lenny, it couldn't have been Kenny because it was Lenny. That's an a priori argument to say, well, let's make Lenny fit. He must have broken out of his thing. He must have done all these things. Or the whole Denny hoax, he's not even dead. Do you have evidence of that? No. But it can't be Kenny, so it's got to be Denny. When you begin by assuming something's going to happen, you're going to find, or at least look for evidence on why it could potentially be. But is that the best explanation? No. Very simply, when you plug in our dear friend, this is the wrong direction too, Kenny, you find that his puzzle piece actually satisfies all of the different stimuli. We know why there was no witness pilot. The guy's a millionaire. He can fly his own thing. He knows the moot language. He's got a dog that's a German Shepherd. How did he get up there? He flew his helicopter. Why would someone do this? He got fired. Why has he been attacked by an animal? He had his German Shepherd do it. Why is everything else undisturbed? He wasn't there for finances. He was there for revenge. Why is the artistry so professional? Because the pastor created AI images. And there's a level of professionalism that goes into typing things into an AI generator. That's why, okay? So when we look at our universe and everything that we observe and experience, here's some of the questions that we have to ask. What is the basis for our idea of having objective morality? That things are right and wrong, universally speaking. What is the best explanation for the complexity and the fine-tuning of our universe? Why do we have an ordered and sustained universe when a universe of increasing and out-of-context entropy is far more likely? That everything is chaotic. Why is there a universe at all? That makes more sense. There would be nothing. What explains consciousness, the fact that we as sentient creatures can think about other things? Why was the cause of the universe, why was the cause of the universe from nothing? Ex nihilo nihil fit, this expression of out of nothing, nothing comes. Why is there something rather than nothing in the first place? And what is the best explanation for the millions of people who would claim to have a religious experience? When you put an answer in here, you can't just have it, like if there's a little inlet right here, you can't just put something right here and say, blind random chance. Because if you use this puzzle piece of cosmic accident right here, it doesn't fit all the other questions that we're asking. So sometimes what we do in agnosticism or atheism or methodological scientism is we say, here's one answer for this to satisfy this, but it leaves so many other questions unanswered that it actually creates more issues than it actually solves. So the solution to any one of these things has to be cogent enough to satisfy all of these things. You can't just ignore it, right? If you said, why are you able to look at me right now? And you go, well, Darwinian explanation says that we have evolved over time, all these things. Okay, so you're going to a strictly naturalistic approach. where did life come from in the first place? Well, we don't have any answer to that. Well, what about a cosmic beginning? Well, we don't have any answer to that. So you're not really satisfying the explanatory scope of the problem. You're only asserting one issue inside of it, and you're leaving everything else undone. In some cases, you're doing the exact opposite, right? Like Bertrand Russell uses a brute facts approach to this question of why is there something rather than nothing? Gottfried Leibniz is a famous mathematician, philosopher, and theologian who asks the question, why is there something rather than nothing? You know what Bertrand Russell says? It just is. That's all there is to it. It always has been. It requires no explanation, which means you're assuming right then that the reason we see anything is because everything has always been here. The universe has eternally existed. Oh, okay. You're right. If the universe has eternally existed, then we don't need an explanation for why it's here because it's always been. Here's the problem. The problem with that is if you assume that the universe has always been here, there's a lot of questions that are raised, like the idea of the second law of thermodynamics. Every bit of energy inside of a system breaks down over time, which means if there's an infinite number of time before today, did you know that every day the sun is slowly running out of heat? Did you know that every single day, the moon actually gets a measurable distance away from Earth? Did you know that every day, the salt content in the ocean increases? It's about 3.45% right now, but it increases every year. Did you know that the usable amount of heat left in the universe is going down every single day, right? That's why when you heat up your coffee cup in the morning, it's not hot 3 days later. Do you wanna know why? Because energy in a system, it dissipates. Things move from order to chaos, from hot to cold. But there's still measurable, usable heat energy left in our universe, which means if you think the universe has always existed, what should we find in our universe? The answer is absolutely no sense of any kind of intelligent life because there'd be no heat, there'd be no usable energy. What would our oceans be? A big block of salt. How far would the moon be away? You need an infinite number of time that moon would have gone completely, and the universe as we see should have no energy in it. But is there energy? Yes. Is it usable? Yes. What does that show us? It shows us that the universe is not eternal in the past, that it had a beginning. Every working model of the universe asserts this. So when Bertrand Russell says, the answer to why is there something rather than nothing, there just is. That is not an explanation. That is a non-explanation. So we need a solution that satisfies all of these things. The God hypothesis, this is the hypothesis. I'm not asserting this, I'm giving a hypothesis. And in science, we give a hypothesis, then we test it. The God hypothesis is the best explanation for these things that we observe. The origin of the universe, efficient causality, biogenesis, the beginning of life, experience of miracles, ordered nature, contingency, consciousness, conscience, ubiquitous desire, religious experience, objective morality, fine-tuning, time, degrees of perfection, apparent evil and suffering, and the aesthetic experience. God satisfies all of those questions. And it isn't the God of the gaps where you go, well, you just say God and everything's fixed. Every one of these has an argument backed by science, reason, and philosophy on why God's the best explanation. We're not simply asserting, we're here to make a point. So today, this is gonna get very technical for some of you who don't care. You're gonna think this is a wild waste of your time. But for people built like me, this is gonna be phenomenally interesting to you, okay? And for the 8 of us who really care, we're gonna have a great time. Gen Z, Gen Alpha are far more dogmatic and interested in apologetics than the previous generations were. I used to teach apologetics at Hume Lake 15 years ago when I went up there to teach, and I'd have like 60 people. They were all homeschooled kids pushing their glasses in their face going, well, technically, now, I kid you not, when I do an apologetics seminar at Hume Lake, it's packed. There'll be 1,200 kids in a room asking these questions. Religious experience and just so stories aren't working anymore. But this generation is interested in the topic. They want to know. They're ready to have Christianity be proven true or false, but they don't want to just go with a ho-hum just so understanding of believe in God because God wrote the Bible and the Bible is true because God wrote it. That is not going to work anymore. So we take 3 of these things that we're going to look at today. Let's just take 3 of all of these things. There's more than 25 of them. I made a list. Universal origin, existence of the universe, and fine-tuning. Again, a lot of you did that this week. If you want this slideshow, just email me and I'll send it to you so you don't have to try to figure out how to take notes so rigorously. You can just enjoy or not enjoy. You could sleep and then I'll give you I'll send them to you. So my email's on the website. Find that, email me, I'll send it to you. We'll be kosher. A lot of you already did that because I spent half my week responding to those emails. All right. Gottfried Wilhelm Leibniz, 1646 to 1716. He's a last universal genius. He's a mathematician, philosopher, scientist, and diplomat. He invented calculus, right? Didn't you too, right? Okay. He actually invented calculus contemporaneously with a guy named Isaac Newton, but people liked Leibniz's version and notation better. So that's the one that we're using. He invented the calculator. He had a major lasting impact in every field that he practiced. He's a lifelong Christian. And he asked this question: why is there something rather than nothing? So our first argument that we're gonna give for a reason and explanation that best fits the criteria is to say the answer to the question of why is there something rather than nothing is best explained by God. Here's how. Theism is the best explanation for the existence of the universe. William Lane Craig, famous philosopher, uses this to illustrate the argument from Contingency. Imagine you're hiking up a mountain, you and your friends are really tired, and you see a floating blue orb. And one of your friends says, where did that orb come from? What is that orb doing there? Who put that orb there? What's the purpose of that orb? And you're so tired that you say, no one. It's nothing. Who cares? Move forward. Did you explain why that orb is there? No. And it's really not an explanation of anything. Now, if an orb floating on a trailhead on top of a mountain that you ask, where did this thing come from? It's a rational and expected answer that that orb came from somewhere. And if someone says, the orb has always been there, or the orb made itself, or if you said, the orb needs no explanation, you would think that the person saying that is crazy, right? If a floating orb right now, as I'm talking, just started going right here and just started spinning, and you were staring at it, I wouldn't be like, hey, focus. Because you would all go, what is that? And if I went, it's nothing, you would say, but it kind of is something. It needs no explanation. Of course it does. Well, it's always been there. No, it hasn't. Those are all non-explanations. So he said, his question is, so if that blue floating orb gets a little bit bigger, does it still require an explanation? Yeah. What if it gets so big it's as big as the earth? Then does it require an explanation? Yes. What if it's not as big as the earth, but it's as big as the whole universe? 13.75 billion years across. Then does it need an explanation? Yet there's nothing about size that takes away the need for something to be explained. That's called the taxi cab fallacy. To say, oh, small things need explanations, bigger things need explanations, bigger things need explanations. And then like a taxi cab, you get out at some point because someone goes, okay, what if it's as big as the universe? Well, then it requires no explanation. Why? What about size takes away need for an explanation? It doesn't make sense. So Leibniz's his argument says, just because that orb isn't this big, but it's 13.75 billion years across, it still needs an explanation for why it's there. And every argument that didn't work with the floating orb here doesn't work with the floating orb there. It's always been there. It made itself. Nothing made it. Those are all non-answers. So what is the best explanation for why there is something rather than nothing? The argument follows like this. Everything that exists has an explanation of its existence. If the universe has an explanation of its existence, that explanation is God. We'll argue why. The universe does exist. Okay, that's prima facie cogency. If you want to argue against this one, good luck, okay? Therefore, the explanation of the universe's existence is God. So this is a provable argument, meaning that the conclusion follows rightly from the premises. So my job then is to make sure that we show that all of the premises are true. And if we can prove these are true, then the conclusion follows rightly from them. Okay, it's not post hoc, it's not ad hoc, it's not begging, this is a real argument style. So, we come with this explanation. Is it warm in here to you people? It's kind of, or is it just the lights on me? Okay, it's a little bit warm. What are they talking about? Two explanations for anything. So anything that exists has an explanation for its existence. And Leibniz's contingency argument says everything fits into one of two camps. Everything you can possibly think of fits into one of two camps. Either that thing is a necessary thing or it's a contingent thing. The word contingent is a fancy word that means it doesn't have to be here. It relies on something outside of itself to exist, okay? This is in fancy philosophical terms, those that exist but could have failed to exist. Am I a contingent being? Yes. Can we imagine a world where Chris Hilken doesn't exist? Sure. A less happy one. Just kidding. A less boring one. You could imagine one. I don't have to exist. In fact, all it would have taken is my parents. Yeah, okay, you know where kids come from. There's nothing about my being that's necessary. If I never existed, no one would be like, well, I wish we could have a universe, but we don't have a Chris Hilken to satisfy it. Is this podium a contingent thing? Yes. There's nothing in its nature that requires it to exist. It's not a necessary entity. It's a contingent one. So that means that it didn't make itself, because if a podium were to make itself, it would have to exist before it made itself, which is a tautology of reasoning. Something can't make itself because it would have to predate itself in order to create itself, which is ridiculous. And if I told you this podium is here, but it came from nothing, you would say, ex nihilo nihil fit. Out of nothing, nothing comes. It's the first rule of astrophysics. Nothing can't do anything. As Aristotle said, nothing is what rocks dream about. Nothing. No thing. Universal negation. No thing. What made this podium? Nothing. Nothing can't do that. Nothing can only be nothing. Can't do anything else. So this is a contingent thing. The chair you're sitting on is contingent. You yourself are contingent. The clothes you're wearing are contingent. The space is contingent. We can imagine a world in which space didn't exist. It would have non-existence. Is the universe contingent? Is it possible, do we have any reason based on the ideas of space, time, and matter that the universe has to exist by nature of itself? No. The universe doesn't need to exist. It does. But we can imagine a scenario in which it never did exist. Which means, is the universe necessary or is it contingent? Contingent. The universe is a contingent entity. What do contingent entities require? Explanations that are transcendent of themselves. The universe, if you argue the universe made itself, that's as ridiculous as saying the podium made itself or I made myself. The universe, if it's a contingent thing, can't make itself because the universe would have to predate itself in order to create itself. You also can't say, well, the universe just is, like a brute facts approach from Bertrand Russell. That's a non-explanation. You also can't say it came out of nothing because ex nihilo nihil fit. This is the number one rule of astrophysics, which means the universe needs an explanation transcendent of itself. Transcendent means it can't be bound by universe things. What are universe things? Space, time, matter, energy, okay? So, if the universe needs something transcendent of itself, bigger than itself, outside of itself, and inside of the universe is space, time, matter, and energy, then we're looking for a candidate. But that candidate must be very particular because that candidate cannot be bound by anything in the universe, which means the explanation can't be part of the universe. It has to be outside of it. So it has to be spaceless, it must be timeless, and it must be immaterial. It must be powerful enough to create universes. It must be intelligent enough to know how to do so. It must have personal qualities, that means qualities like a person, to decide that it wants to make a decision. These are all person-like qualities. So here's our hunt. We need a powerful, intelligent, personal, spaceless, timeless, immaterial being. anyone in philosophy, theology, physics, anything, when you say, explain the character of God, they will start with these ideas. Maybe not intentionally, omniscient, omnipresent, omnipotent. What does that mean? All powerful, all knowing, all places at the same time. In other words, spaceless, timeless, immaterial. The Bible concludes the same thing. We need a spaceless being. Jeremiah 23 tells us that. God is timeless. 2 Timothy 1:9. He's immaterial. John 4:24. He's made of spirit. He is powerful. Jeremiah 32:17. He's intelligent. 1 John 3:20. He's personal. Isaiah 46:10 and 11. He is a spaceless, timeless, immaterial, powerful, intelligent, personal being. So modern cosmology comes to the conclusion that the only potential candidate for the transcendent creator of all things must be a being that fits this description. And you open 3,000 to 6,000 year old pages of a book that's sitting in your lap right now, and this is how we understand God. The original necessary, God is a necessary, not a contingent being. Because if he exists, he would have to exist eternally. Okay, he's a maximally great being, which means any property he has must be maximally great. So he can't be a temporary being because we can imagine a reality in which something's better than temporary, which is that being would have to be eternal. So God's character would necessitate he was eternal, which means by nature of his character, God would be infinite. So he is a necessary, if he exists, he is a necessary being. Other necessary things in the cosmos are numbers, states of being, properties, laws of non-contradiction. Numbers would exist even if people never existed. We wouldn't call them 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. But if no people ever existed and there was 4 rocks, there'd still be a set of 4 of those things, even if no one ever qualified that number as 4. Number sets are what philosophers call necessary things. But can numbers do anything? Can numbers interact with the physical world? Can numbers create worlds? Can the rule of non-contradiction create universes? No. So we're looking for a necessary entity that has power-making qualities. And there's only one. Spaceless, timeless, immaterial, personal, intelligent, powerful being, the uncaused cause, the unmoved mover, what Scripture calls God. This is the argument from Contingency. There's good reason in believing that the reason there's something rather than nothing is because a being outside, transcendent of all space, time, and matter created it. Secondly, God is the best explanation for the beginning of the universe. Here's how the argument works. Kalam is a Muslim philosopher and mathematician. He came up with this argument called the Kalam cosmological argument. Whatever begins to exist has a cause. The universe began to exist. Modus ponens tells us, therefore the universe has a cause. This is an airtight argument. As long as we can prove the premise is true, the conclusion follows rightly from the axiomatic phrases, if you care. So all we're responsible for doing then is if we can prove the universe had a beginning, then we can prove that it was caused. And cause or causal things, again, can't be inside of them, and it has to be greater than them. Here's what Stephen Hawking, maybe you've heard of him. He said, a point of creation, so this is when everyone believed the steady state universe. It's just always been. Now, that's been completely debunked for a lot of reasons. But he said, so if you were able to prove a point of creation, it would be a place where science broke down. One would have to appeal to religion and the hand of God. I appreciate his candor. If we can prove a beginning, it would appeal to the hand of God. Great. Here's evidence since he made that remark that points to the definite idea of a point of creation. Borde-Blanken-Guth theorem stipulates that any universe which is on average expanding has not been doing so infinitely into the past, but had a point at which it began. You don't care. On Thursday night at the forum, we're gonna get real nerdy with this stuff. I'm just gonna glaze over it. If you think this is nerdy, you're already like, how could it get any nerdier? Okay, we'll have live Q&A. We'll talk about these things on Thursday night. But the Borde-Blanken-Guth theorem stipulates that our universe is expanding at a rate of 68 kilometers per second per megaparsecond. That's how fast our universe is expanding. Which means, if you reverse that, there's a point at which everything was in a nuclear dense, infinitely nuclear dense, what we call singularity in philosophy. That would prove a point of creation. We also have Penzias's discovery of the red light shift, the infinite events paradox. What is the infinite? It's Zeno's paradox of infinite events. Okay. If the universe is infinitely old, how many yesterdays would have to be before today? An infinite number of yesterdays, which means the argument is that if there's such thing as present time, the universe can't be infinitely old because you would need an infinite number of yesterdays before you ever got to today. You would always need one more day before the day that you were born, one more day before creation came into existence, or before people were ever born. You would always need one more day, and you would never catch up to present time. Okay. Philosophically, the infinite events paradox, the discovery of cosmic microwave background radiation. When God said, let there be light, or as Sir Fred Hoyle, making fun of Lemaitre, said, when the Big Bang occurred, it created a heat resonance in our universe. That heat is still measurable today. They sent a satellite up to listen for organisms to try to talk to aliens. And what they found was this like hum. And they thought like birds on the big antenna down here on Earth were like perching on it, on the satellites, because they were hearing this hum and this vibration. They accidentally discovered cosmic microwave background radiation, which is the palpable, tangible, measurable heat still left over from when the universe exploded, from the quote unquote Big Bang, or when God said, let there be light. You can still measure it. And the measurement of it is in 1 part in 100,000, which means it is remarkably specific. We'll talk more about that on Thursday night. The general theory of relativity from Einstein and the law of entropy tells us the universe had a beginning. No one really argues with this stuff, okay? The question comes into the multiverse or string theory or whatever it is, okay? So, Vilenkin writes this in his discussion. Remember what Hawking said, if you can prove a point at what everything began, that would appeal to the hand of God. Here's what Vilenkin said from his proof. It is said that an argument is what convinces reasonable men, and a proof is what it takes to convince even an unreasonable man. With the proof now in place, cosmologists can no longer hide behind the possibility of a past eternal universe. There is no escape. They have to face the problem of a cosmic beginning. The BVG theorem proves this. This is one of my favorites. His name's Dr. Robert Jastrow. He's the first one to sit as the director of NASA's Goddard Institute of Space Studies. This dude's smart, right? He's agnostic, cosmologist, geophysicist, Yale professor. Here's what he writes. This is kind of funny. The essential element in the astronomical and biblical accounts of Genesis is the same. For the atheist scientist, the story has ended like a bad dream. He has scaled the mountains of ignorance. He's about to conquer the highest peak. As he pulls himself over the final rock, he is greeted by a band of theologians who have been there for centuries. Okay? So there's all this proof coming out just in the last 100 years of everyone going, we've got this remarkable, earth-shaking, universe-shattering thing to tell you. The universe had a beginning. And theologians are sitting there going, Genesis 1:1. In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. Heavens is Uranus, the heavenly bodies, and the earth. Wait. So he's saying this is the bad dream principle. They gave a guy a Nobel Prize for discovering the universe had a beginning. It's like, I think God deserves that. You know, like God, at least Moses, someone besides him deserves that medal. That's the beginning of the universe. The last argument we're going to talk about today is the fine-tuning of the universe. We're going to go deep into this one on Thursday. The fine-tuning of the universe is due either to physical necessity, chance, or design. So the idea that our universe is so complex, and I'll tell you what complexity means here in a second. It's either all of the properties of our universe have to be that way. Universe has to be set the way, the gravity has to be set the way that it is. The breakdown of the human system, the low entropy universe, the tilt of the world on its axis at 23.5 degrees. It either all has to be that way, which it isn't. It's independent. So that one's already crossed out. We'll talk about that more. But so it's either a chance, random chance, that our universe is the way that it is, or it was designed. So if we can get rid of the idea of physical necessity and chance, our only option left is that it was designed. It was done on purpose. Therefore, it is due to design. Our universe is made up of these dials. This first little sheet program slide, That's what I'm looking for. This is just the improbability of our universe having the properties it needs to have planets, planetary systems, anything at all. It needs to be a low entropy universe. The odds of low entropy universe being our universe randomly by chance is 1 in 10 to the 10th power raised to the 123rd power. You gotta get context because these numbers are meaningless. There are 10 to the 80th atoms in our universe. And an atom is to an orange what an orange is to planet Earth, okay? There's only 10 to the 80th power atoms in the entire universe. I am made up of hundreds of millions of atoms. If I told you on me that I painted one of my atoms red and you had to blindfolded pick that atom randomly somewhere in my body, the odds of you picking it randomly would be like 1 in 450 million, something like that. If you painted one atom red in the entire cosmos, that's every planet, its nuclear density, that's every human, that's every zebra, that's every tree, that's every rock, that's every galaxy, that's every Horsehead Nebula, all of it. And you painted one atom in the entire universe red. You blindfolded yourself. And I gave you 14.75 billion years of traveling at the speed of light to eventually at one point blindfolded stop, pick a planet, pick a rock, and on that rock made of hundreds of millions of atoms, you gotta choose one, blindfolded, and you pick the right one. That would be 10 to the 80th power chance. With just the cosmological constant or the expansion rate, the odds of that happening by chance is 1 in 10 to the 120th power. The force of gravity is set at 1 10 to the 40th power. The flatness problem, 10 to the 15th. And in order for all these to be in sync, in order to create a universe where we can see planets, you have to multiply them all together. And this is 8 of 322. There's 322 dials that are set like this, not 8 of them. That's just for a universe that would have any kind of existence like planets. Now, in order for a planet to be able to support life like we see, it would need a tilt like this, an elliptical orbit, planetary protection, proper star galactic. There are 212 different things that are needed for this to take place. I've only shown you 6 of them. The odds of a planet like Earth being able to support life by random chance are 1 in 10 to the 66th power. And you think, well, there's probably planets everywhere that have life on them. Well, there's only 10 to the 20th planets in our entire universe, which means, I'm gonna switch these around. Might have. But the odds of one of those supporting life is an astronomical number so ridiculous that a planet could support life at all, that's taking those two calculations together, the first and second, that it would still be 1 in 10 to the 144th power. It's the odds of there randomly being life on a planet. Now, complex intelligent life that we see has its own category and a different set of dials also. Self-replicating molecules happening by chance, the chance of DNA occurring by itself, the chance of insulin being exactly what it is, life of any kind, and then complex intelligent life. This is Hugh Ross, creator in the cosmos, cosmologist, mathematicians, astrophysicists, all getting together and coming up with these dials and numbers. Here's what Fred Hoyle said. The likelihood of the formation of life from inanimate matter, that's just this screen, is enough to bury Darwin and the whole theory of evolution. And if the beginnings of life were not random, they must therefore have been the product of purposeful intelligence. So you can look at slides 1, 2, and 3, multiply this by all of this, by all of this, and recognize these are only a couple of the hundreds of dials you need, multiply that all together and say, we got lucky, didn't we? Recognizing that about 1 in 10 to the 50th power is considered mathematically impossible. We get to 1 in 10 to the 50th power with just a low entropy universe. It's already mathematically impossible for one of the hundreds of things to be possible. Now you multiply that by everything else and you get to a conclusion. Too long. Fred Hoyle. This is the guy who made fun of Georges Lemaitre because Georges Lemaitre was a Catholic priest who said the universe had a beginning in this cosmic explosion. Fred Hoyle made fun of him and said, the Big Bang Theory. So believers were the first one to propose the idea of a cosmic beginning. Scientists made fun of it, and he said tongue-in-cheek, the Big Bang model, making fun of a Catholic priest, and now it's the working model of the universe. But Sir Fred Hoyle, after realizing all these things, said this: a common sense interpretation of the facts suggests that a super intellect has monkeyed with physics, as well as with chemistry and biology, and that there are no blind forces worth speaking about in nature. The number one calculates from the facts seems to me so overwhelming as to put this conclusion beyond question. Francis Collins, he mapped out the human genome. To get our universe with all of its potential for complexities or any kind of potential for any kind of life form, everything has to be precisely defined on this knife edge of improbability. You have to see the hand of a creator who set the parameters to be just so, because the creator was interested in something a little more complicated than random particles. Hawking, remember him? The remarkable fact is that the values of these numbers seem to have been finely adjusted to make possible the development of life. So, did I just prove to you God exists? No, absolutely not. You can have a lucky us hypothesis. You can have the only possible world hypothesis. You can have all these other things. But that's not the question that we get in science and anything other than the God hypothesis. We arrive at a conclusion, we test it, and that becomes our working model until a better one comes along. But because theism is a supernatural conclusion, the scientist is bound by non-overlapping magisterial authorities to assume that there is no God, and they continue to search for a reason for a cosmic beginning and biogenesis and complex life forms and a just so universe and the expansion rate, and they have to get rid of God to do so. But I'd propose to you that if you get rid of the a priori argument that you have to be bound by all these different systems and you look at the facts for themselves and you are free to come to a conclusion that you'd like to, the best explanation for just 3 of a number of different arguments we could make is that there is a God. I think each of these conclusions follows from the premises. The premises can be proven at least more plausible than implausible. And I think we have good reason as believers to believe that there is a God, that he knows you. And the idea then that Jesus Christ is his son, and we've begged that question the whole time. But next week, we're gonna dive into the idea of, okay, so if there's a God, what makes Christianity true? What makes the Bible the way that God's revealed himself to us? And we'll talk about that next week. Would you pray with me? God, we submit ourselves in moments like this to just the awe and the wonder of who you are. It's so easy just to think that today we're having a Sunday and that the clouds are coming in and rolling in and dropping rain and beginning life cycles that we couldn't even begin to try to possibly explain or imagine. And then I have the audacity to sit in moments and not sit in wonder of who you are and the complexity and the evidence and the reason for following you, God. Would this be something that bolsters our faith for the believer? Would it just at least create questions for the skeptic, but for them to know that our solution is not to be right, and the reason for this series is not to prove something wrong, but instead that you're a God who sits there and looks for us and calls us home, and you want us to find you. That's why Romans says you've made yourself so obvious to us. God, would you continue to do your work in our hearts as we continue this series? In your name we pray, amen.